Hey everybody, Brianna Whitney here, host of True Crime AZ Live. I first want to thank everybody for being with us on this Friday night. Typically we do this show at 7 p.m. on Thursdays, and I know a lot of you were actually waiting on the YouTube link for the show last night. We had some unexpected tech issues, specifically with my microphone. Most of those have now been fixed. But if you see during the show me doing something like this, where I'm putting something in and out of my ear, it's what's called an IFB. It's a mix minus issue. Basically means that when I'm talking to you guys and I have this in my ear, I can hear myself talking like about a second behind what I'm actually saying. But in order to hear our interviews and our sound bites and everything, I need to put it back in my ear. So just ignore it if you see me taking it in and out. But we are here tonight. We're excited to be with you guys, and we have some big cases we want to talk about. We're also going to be taking questions, comments, analysis live, which is honestly my favorite part of this entire show. So get ready. If you have questions, I want you to write those in. We'll be addressing them live. We have a live interview coming up. So let's start with our first segment, the big case tonight. So if you are paying attention to national true crime news, this is probably something that you have seen online, on television, a big story, Baby Emmanuel Haro out of Southern California. You're seeing some video here of Baby Emanuel, and he is still missing at this time. He was reported missing first by his parents, Jake and Rebecca Haro, and you're seeing video of them there because they were eventually arrested for Emmanuel's murder. So this is how this all started to unfold. I'm going to kind of take you through the timeline that we know, and then we're going to go to some sound from the Riverside County District Attorney, because that started to paint a much more tragic and widespread picture of the amount of child abuse that is going on in this case overall. So this is Baby Emanuel. He's 7 months old. This is going on in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. They're working together. Started on August 14th when Baby Emanuel's mom, Rebecca, right there, reported that her son was kidnapped. She said and claimed that they were in the parking lot of a Big Five sporting goods store when she was knocked unconscious by somebody, and when she came to or regained consciousness, her baby was gone. That's what she and her husband, Jake, went with. They were talking to media. They were doing tearful interviews. They were holding their own press conferences. They were passing out flyers. But police and detectives start to figure out that her story is not really adding up in about the first 24 hours. And part of that was because they were able to obtain surveillance footage. Obviously, if you are in some sort of strip mall parking lot or store parking lot, you are probably going to have surveillance footage at any one of those businesses nearby. And that started to show that what Rebecca was reporting probably was not true, and there was something a little bit off. So fast forward, they don't put out an Amber Alert because they're pretty sure that there was something more sinister here. And they start serving search warrants on Rebecca and Jake's property and looking more into this case. They now believe that Baby Emanuel was abused and died from those abuse injuries. They believe he was killed sometime between August 5th and August 14th, which was a 9-day period before Rebecca Haro ever called 911. Now, they gave a press conference a couple days ago. This was the Riverside County DA and also the San Bernardino Sheriff talking about where they are in the investigation. Jake has actually been taken out with investigators to the areas that the remains may be in. But as of now, Baby Emanuel is still missing. They took out cadaver dogs, everything like that. And at this point, the baby is still missing. But there was enough evidence for detectives to concur that he was murdered by his parents, and both of them were charged with murder. Now, here's where things start to get extremely tragic. Baby Emanuel was only 7 months old. And in 2018, the district attorney told us that Jake Haro and his ex-wife were prosecuted for child abuse and neglect. That child was an infant. Those charges were filed in 2021, and that case made it to the courts in 2023. The Riverside County DA and the state wanted Jake Haro to be in prison, to face prison time. And that's what they asked for in this case. But the judge actually said, and I'm reading this off the page here, I'm giving you a big break, don't mess it up. And instead gave Jake Haro probation and 180 days of community service. Well, how that case played out means that Jake Haro was not in prison and instead was in a position to potentially and allegedly abuse Emmanuel. And the Riverside County District Attorney is pissed, and rightfully so, at the judge that made that decision. He actually talked about it, and I want to play that sound for you now.
I will say that it was an outrageous error in judgment by this judge. And I don't have any problem saying that. I'm not attacking the judge personally. That decision was absolutely outrageous. Mr. Haro should have been in prison at the time that this crime happened. And if that judge had done his job as he should have done, Emmanuel would be alive today. And that's a shame, and it's an outrage. And I hate to say that.
And I think so many people would agree with that district attorney. For more context and perspective, the infant that was abused in that case was so severely abused that she is now bedridden with cerebral palsy. I want to bring in our first live interview for True Crime AZ Live tonight. This is Steve Fischer. He's a private investigator out of California. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. For people who are watching, you and I have worked together on some Arizona cases, and a lot of people follow you on Twitter or X to follow these kind of investigations that you do when you're involved, or you conduct your own kind of side investigation to a case. I started to pay attention to your tweets in the Baby Emanuel case because I was seeing you doing some drone surveillance of the Haro property, the residents, and maybe some of the areas nearby that they were searching for Baby Emanuel in. Can you talk to me about how you decided to get involved in this case and what kind of surveillance with your drone you've been doing?
Yeah, actually, I was out in Arizona and on a case, and I was coming back to LA when this all started happening. So actually before the arrest, but they had she had just done her press conference at the Big Five, saying that it was a kidnapping, and so it was literally that day I was on my way back, and I wasn't far from the area, and I stopped and kind of just watched the whole thing unravel, and boy, did it unravel. And so I stayed there for several days, and it was just it was apparent very quickly that it was not what she was portraying. I mean, the Big Five. I talked to some Big Five employees. They literally laughed at about her story. They're like, that's just not it happened.
So it was clear from the start things were off. And honestly, you could tell even when they were talking to media, it just seemed off is the best way I could describe it. So you start taking your drone out, and we're looking at some of that footage here. I think this is detectives going through their property. Did you notice anything specific when you were getting that video?
You can see there's a detective. They're sifting through the trash, and there's also a detective in the window. And so there's actually three separate standalone buildings on the property, but their focus seemed to be on the property that would be on the left, on the west side. And when I went in, actually the first day this was happening, I actually went in and got the affidavit in support of that 2018 arrest, and it talks about when they were searching his room, and there it being his room being in the northwest corner of the house, so that would most likely be the room that they're in right there, and they're searching through the trash. But I gotta say, I was really surprised, considering that they had already arrested them on murder charges, and we're talking about a 7-month-old, that they didn't spend a ton of time at the processing the house, and it was a pretty small crew actually, and it was San Bernardino team, even though we were in the houses in Riverside County. I was surprised that they were out of there pretty quick. They did not. There's rumors that they were digging up the backyard and all this, but none of that was going on. I didn't see anything being checked in the backyard.
So would that lead you to believe possibly that wherever Emmanuel was reportedly killed was not in the home, or that there would have been some sort of killing that would not have left much evidence in the bedroom?
kind of go back and forth because they're checking through trash, which you would think wouldn't be that old if it was an older,
Right.
and if the killing happened a while ago, maybe they're looking for receipts. Like it said that there was some receipts. Then this is just rumor from like a Home Depot and whatnot, and I don't know if that's true, but they definitely it appears must have had some sort of digital intelligence, whether it be from warrants or Celebrite or whatever it may be, that they didn't believe the baby was on the property, because I would have thought they would have had cadaver dogs out there running several passes through there. I'd heard that maybe a cadaver dog was run there, but I didn't personally see it.
Yeah, and that was something that we did see and hear from the press conference. We learned there were some cadaver dogs, not at the house, I guess, but out where they were searching. Did you take your drone out to that area that Jake was out with investigators? Like he was in his full orange jumpsuit, just out on
Yeah.
the side of the freeway. Were you in that area too?
Yeah, so I went the day out after they cleared the area and it wasn't interfering. I did go out there the next day and I imaged that whole mountain area, and it's a listen. That would be a difficult area to actually bury a baby because that it is like rock hard. It's literally like stone underneath that initial layer. And it's also, if you pulled over there, because of the way that 60 highway is at that area, it's gated on both sides, and if you pull over, it's an emergency lane. You're really going to get some attention. So I was kind of
Yeah.
surprised at that area, considering where their house is. You look at their backyard in 360 degrees, that's all you see is open terrain. I mean, literally, it's if anybody's done that drive from Arizona to Palm Springs, where those wind farms are. That's where they
Yeah.
live. They live right under the wind turbines, and it's just vast open land. So why this would happen there off a 60 is a busy freeway, and it's also become a big distribution center for like Amazon and stuff. So there's a lot of construction going on. Didn't make much sense to me, but they something. He's telling them some story that's getting them out there, even though they weren't there very long either.
Well, and the part that still confuses me too is he's out there with them. If he
Yeah,
buried Emmanuel, wouldn't you think that they would have found the baby then?
yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
definitely think that he's. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, no, no. I guess my question now to you, and maybe this is what you were going to answer too. The DA said they have a strong suspicion, or they understand that they believe Emmanuel is in a certain area or location. They haven't found him, but they believe they know the area where he's in. What do you make of that?
I don't have any inside information, so I don't want this put out as anybody to take this as fact. But to me, I think that means they believe he's in a landfill,
A
and
landfill. Okay.
yeah, and there is several landfills in that area. In fact, Badlands, which is where Jake was, the other side of that, the back side of that hill, is the beginning of a landfill. So, but there's one close to their house too, and if he was discarded in a dumpster or something like that, then unfortunately he would go to a landfill, and maybe that's why we haven't seen the activity. Maybe it just hasn't been public facing. Maybe they have been out there, and we just haven't been aware of it. But the fact that we haven't seen search and rescue teams back out either in the Badlands area or even around their house, I think is very telling. For a 7-month-old, even if they 100% believe that he's deceased, there would still be a massive presence, I would think, out searching for him. So I have a feeling that they're thinking it's something like a landfill, or they have some other intelligence that tells them that, unfortunately, it's not, he's not recoverable right now.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I want to take a couple questions live while you're still with
Sure.
us. That way, you and I can answer them. So, and if you have more questions, write in because we want to take them live. So here we have. Totally agree with the district attorney regarding the judge's decision in the last case. Steve, you were
Yeah.
going through those court documents. Were there other things that you heard or read in that case that made it
Yeah.
more disturbing than it already is?
Yeah. So I went in on the first day and actually got the case files for the 2018, and I had put out on Twitter, I'm like, this guy got one day 1 day in jail. He got a 180-day sentence, but 179 days of that was work release, where he got to go home at night. 1 day was just to check in and be booked. And I put that out there. And I also put, this happened in 2018, and this didn't resolve until 2023.
Yeah.
And he had 21 continuances.
Why?
And that was unacceptable. And so, people, rightfully so, like you said earlier, were pissed. And I actually, and it's the first time this has ever happened to me, I actually got a DM from the Riverside County DA's office, and they said, "Can we talk?" And we talked, and they called me, and they said, "We, we're not telling you what to put out or anything. We just want to explain to you, we 100% objected to this sentencing, and this was he." Jake pled directly to the court. They said he came in for a mandatory settlement conference, one that he did not get the continuance for.
Yeah.
There was a judge from San Bernardino County that was what they call a visiting judge that was kind of filling in, and so it wasn't even a mandatory settlement conference isn't even in front of the court, and they signed. They were willing to take a deal, and they presented it to the judge, and the judge accepted it. And the DA, they told me, they said, and they did give me the transcripts. I'll say they put on the record that they totally objected to this. They felt that this was a prison case. They noted that this is a child that now has 3% brain function left. She was beat so bad, 10 weeks old, and had healing fractures she had 12 rib breaks, of which like 7 were healing. So they happened. I mean, at 10 weeks old, they were already healing, and she, her cornea, she's permanently blind because she was twisted, so bad, and it really hard to read because they had the report in there from the forensic physician, pediatrician, that giving his opinion of how those injuries happened to this baby, and it's horrific. And he got 1 day. Listen, I know people that have gone to Coachella and gotten arrested for being drunk and done more time than this guy did for literally getting as close to ending his child's life as you can get. I mean, the child's completely bedridden now, 7 years old, and doesn't have any quality of life.
I mean,
And
when you put that perspective,
that
too, it just
was,
really, really highlights,
yeah.
I guess,
Yeah, and I
inequitable
will
system.
say, and I'm not trying to protect the DA, but they stood there like, listen, we understand how it looks, but we were, and when you see it on paper, they really were against this. They objected to that, and then we saw it
Yeah.
at the press conference after. That was like 2 days after, and um, so that judge bears a lot of this. I personally believe. I mean, there's no reason. And then on top of that, Jake violates that unbelievable deal he gets, that gift
Right.
that he got, and he gets caught with a gun
I mean,
in
it
last year.
just is like one domino falls, they all go down. There's one other question I want to take now. Ariana's writing in: are lie directors or detectors, I'm assuming, allowed? Especially, and I actually have this question for you as well. When you have a married couple who is in jail accused of murder, are they going to try, do you think, to have them rat each other out for whatever involvement they may have had in Emmanuel's death?
Yeah. So so going back, and just because patterns do repeat with Jake, in 2018, in the probable cause statement, the officer notes on 2 separate occasions, Jake came in to his walked into his office and said, "Hey, I would have never guessed that Vanessa, who was the mom at the time, would have been responsible for this, but now I'm convinced she is." So he tried to roll over and put it all on her twice. And he's doing the same thing to Rebecca, would be my guess, right? And so they're not allowed to have any contact with each other. So they can't, and unless their attorney has some information, and they didn't even have attorneys till Tuesday. So
Yeah, that's
it
it.
was kind of ironic that at the same time he was out with detectives in that field searching for what you got to believe is information that he heard possibly from her. She's giving an interview sticking to the story that the kidnapping happened. And so they were polar opposites of each other. So, I don't think that they know necessarily, they don't know what they're saying. I'm sure maybe it's leaked through the press, even though they're segregated, that they were given different accounts. But I think Jake is just going to do whatever he can do to sell her out and try and get his down to second degree, and where he's maybe out in 25 years,
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. Thank you for all your insight in this case. I know the work that you've been doing on the side too, just even kind of breaking down what everything means to the public too, on social media, where a lot of people are paying attention to this. Obviously, we hope Emmanuel's remains are found. We're going to keep following this case, keep us updated as well. And then even on this show too, we could hopefully bring you back on when we learn more as the case unfolds. But we appreciate you being on. You're our first live guest we've ever had on this show. Great work. Thank you again. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Nice seeing you.
All right, guys, thank you so much. So that's the latest on the Baby Emanuel case. We'll keep following that one. We're going to take a quick break before our next segment. And I just want to explain a little bit about our breaks, too. Some people had asked me, hey, we could see you on camera during that break last week. And I want to explain why. We're going to put up a slate here for that minute. But the people that have YouTube Premium, or the people who are watching on Roku, they actually do have ads playing for a minute there. It's just on regular YouTube, if you're watching, they don't have those ads. So that's why we put up a slate or whatever, and you're kind of seeing the behind the scenes of us. So we'll be right back in just a minute. We're going to move on to our next case, which is a big segment here with a big case in Arizona. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. I'm not sure. All right, guys, thanks again for joining us for the second show of True Crime AZ Live. This segment's called The Evidence Vault, and this is actually a case and a segment that I wasn't expecting to do until a couple days ago. But this is a case that kind of flew under the radar here in Arizona. However, when I reported on it last year, I knew that there was probably going to be a lot more to this, that we were going to all perk up and pay attention, because it's one of those where you're so confused why this happened. But it's a murder case here out of Gilbert, Arizona. So I want to tell you a little bit more about it. This is 24-year-old Alijah Bradley, and that's him here. You can see some pictures of him. He was a recent NAU grad last year, 24 years old, was living in Gilbert, Arizona. He was a project engineer, just like an all-around really good guy from everybody that we talked to, from other reports, and just all his accomplishments. But it was last year, mid-August, when his family reported him missing. And this was really strange for him. He didn't show up at work, which was unlike him. His mom tried to contact him and couldn't get a hold of him. And so they knew at that point something was wrong. They were able to track his phone because his mom had the Life 360 app on her phone. And it showed that his phone was at his best friend's apartment. That's Sam Bush. You can see him here on your screen. But then Elijah's phone turned off. And they thought that that was weird too. So they decided to go a different route and tried to contact Toyota to see if they could get GPS coordinates on Elijah's car. And that's when they found it truly in the middle of nowhere. If you live in Arizona, when I say Gila Bend, you probably think tiny town, one street town. There's not much there. It is pretty much the middle of the desert. Nobody would probably know where that is or what that is outside of Arizona, because it truly is the middle of nowhere. And it's also 2 hours from Gilbert, Arizona. So it would make no sense for his car to just be out there. Investigators go out, and that is when they find Alijah Bradley's remains. We knew at the time, because of the information coming out, that his remains were not intact. We did not know a lot more about that at the time. That's what we're learning new that's now. But when they find these remains, they start doing more investigation, and it leads them back to Sam Bush's apartment. Now, he is first arrested for growing marijuana and mushrooms and distributing that from his apartment. But then they end up finding enough evidence to charge him with second-degree murder, concealing body parts, and tampering with evidence. Now, this is Elijah's best friend since they were kids, not like a new best friend. These two grew up together. They were close. We had talked to a family member at the time who said nobody had any idea what would have happened that would have gotten to a point where somebody was potentially killed by the other. But when he was indicted earlier this year, that murder charge was upped from second-degree murder to first-degree murder, which means that they found a whole lot more than they originally did. And he was also originally on a $1.5 million cash-only bond. That is a very high bond, especially for cash-only in general. Now, just going back and looking at the court docket, we can see that it was more than $3 million. So now we're looking at this information thinking, okay, the charge was up from second degree to first degree. His bond is at $3 million. This is all extreme. And we didn't quite know parts of those stories that would explain why those were so high. Now we have a little bit more information, and I'm going to read this. We basically got more court documents and a public records request that showed us the grand jury warrant. Now, sometimes we'll get more information in that's useful. Sometimes we won't. We just go through it to see if there's anything more we can report on a case. And as we were going through this, and when I say we, it's me and our assignment desk editor, Sean. When we are going through this, we're looking to see, okay, is there anything that we didn't know? And we come across this paragraph that is explaining why they were asking for such a high bond. And I do want to warn you, what I'm about to read is definitely graphic and disturbing, but it does explain why everything is so extreme in this case. The reason they asked for this high bond is because, quote, the defendant murdered his longtime best friend by shooting the victim in the back, then went and purchased a reciprocating saw at Home Depot for the specific purpose of cutting off the victim's head and limbs before attempting to dump all of the evidence in the desert. While the defendant has no prior criminal history, he has shown just how violent, sadistic, and depraved he truly is. We did not know that Alijah Bradley's remains were reportedly cut up by a reciprocating saw from Home Depot, that his head and his limbs were all separated from one another. And it just makes this case that much more heinous, but also confusing. I'm looking at the picture just with you guys here. Those two were best friends. And we still don't understand, was Sam Bush on drugs? Was he completely high out of his mind and didn't realize what he was doing? You could argue that, you could ask that. But clearly the fact that a saw was purchased from Home Depot, and for what the court docs say specifically for this purpose, shows immense premeditation. And that clearly is a first-degree murder charge right there. What's bizarre here is we just still don't know a motive in this case. So that is something that we are hoping to learn soon. Now, will this case go to trial? As of now, it is scheduled for mid-November of this year, which sounds about right time-wise when you're talking about that this happened in August of last year. But there is a chance that Sam Bush would try to take a plea deal if that's offered to him, and then we would learn the nature of that plea. If this goes to trial, we should be able to learn all the evidence as to what happened leading up. Was there an argument? We don't know what was on the phones of both Alijah and Sam, but obviously Elijah's phone was at Sam's apartment because his mom was able to track it there. So a lot of missing pieces in this, but that was the first time that we learned just how Elijah's body was found and what happened there. All right, I'm going to take another question here. Do we know the motive? How long after the shooting was the saw purchased? Two good questions. So yeah, we don't know the motive as of now. We'd like to learn the motive, and I think that's what will come out in trial. But they did not say how long either after the shooting or even before was that saw purchased. It was just this little paragraph that we got a snippet of, and everything else is sealed. Things were sealed before as well, which is why we didn't have this information beforehand. So that's definitely a question. And that would also depend probably on some of what the prosecution is going to talk about. If that saw was bought before the shooting even happened, then clearly, allegedly, Sam Bush went in with the intent to shoot his friend, chop up his body, and then dispose of him. Was it something that happened where the two of them had an argument in the apartment? There's a gun. The gun goes off. He's mad, shoots Alijah, reportedly, and then is like, I don't know what I'm going to do now. Now, extreme case to go and get a saw and cut up his body and then drive 2 hours to dispose of it. But that could potentially, I think, alter possibly where the case goes, depending on if there was a premeditation before the shooting to get the saw, or if that was oops, I need to clean up what I've done, and it was just the extreme on the other side. So we're going to be following this case. We'll definitely be covering the trial if and when that happens. Expecting that here in mid-November, but as I'm sure many of you know, the court system is never quite on time. Oftentimes, big trials, first degree especially, get pushed back. So I would not be surprised if this possibly was what's called continued into the next year, into 2026. But if this goes on as scheduled for November, we'll definitely be covering it to try to figure out what on earth happened here to this NAU grad who is a project engineer, seemed like an all-around good guy, and something went wrong with him and his best friend. So we're going to stay on top of that one. We're going to take one more quick break, and then I know a lot of you guys were following this last week in our show when the Menendez brothers were going to their parole hearings. And we are now hearing audio of one of those parole hearings with Eric Menendez. First time in so long that he has talked about the murder, the night it happened. You're going to hear it. We're going to analyze it. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for staying with us. Our last segment of the show. This is the criminal mindset segment. It's one that I think we'll probably touch on quite a bit in the show, just in general, because I think so many of you and me have a fascination and an interest in wanting to learn about the criminal mindset and what that means for cases, especially going forward to what can we learn from people that can be applied or something to prevent possibly in the future cases like this from happening. I think psychology is fascinating. I know some of you watching also are very, very interested in the psychology of people, and probably no one more so than the Menendez brothers when we're talking about psychology and what made somebody do something. So last week when we came at you with our first show, it was quite literally breaking news. Eric Menendez had been in his parole hearing, and we learned minutes before the show started that he was not granted parole, that he was denied parole for at least 3 years. Now, that was happening when we did the show, and we predicted that we thought a similar outcome would happen for Lyle Menendez the next day, and sure enough, it did. Lyle also was denied parole for at least 3 years. But there were actually two different aspects that happened in their hearing for a couple of reasons. One of those being they had different parole board commissioners that were on their respective hearings. So there was a possibility there could be a different outcome. Both of these had to be possibly the longest parole hearings in California history. Eric Menendez's hearing was 10 hours and Lyle's was 11 hours. Part of why Lyle's was so long was because of what we're going to play and talk about here. So the way that this works, when media covers a parole hearing or any type of big hearing, court case, anything like that, or any criminal case, we put in what's called a public records request. And that typically is for anything from a police report, surveillance footage, body camera footage, photographs, text messages, anything that might have been part of the case evidence file that could be then released to the public. This is standard protocol for everybody to do. And so for the Menendez brothers, many news stations, national, local, all of the above, put in public records requests for transcripts, audio, video, whatever they could get from these parole hearings. And for obvious reasons, the public's fascinated and very interested in hearing the outcome of what happens. So as Lyle Menendez is in the middle of his parole hearing, and if you remember from last week, nobody was privy to those hearings as they were going on. There was one LA Times reporter who would watch the hearings, then he would report back after they were in deliberations and then write an article about what happened. So it was almost like a little bit archaic in how we were getting information as is. So mid-hearing for Lyle Menendez, the Department of Corrections in California releases audio of Eric Menendez's parole hearing the day before to ABC7 in LA, or ABC News. It was they're partners, they're part of the same network. So ABC News obtains this audio first, and they publish it. They publish it during the hearing, and the Menendez brothers family were livid. They did not know this was coming out. They did not want this to be out. They felt like it violated the brothers' rights, that they weren't told this was going to happen. Now, the Department of Corrections first said this was done all legally, but they also then said that the audio was released erroneously, but did not elaborate on what that meant. Well, it was kind of one of those things where you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The audio was out there to be played, and there were different segments. And so we were all able to go to ABC7's website and listen to different parts of the parole hearing when Eric Menendez was asked certain questions. There's part of that I want to play for you tonight, and it's specific to the actual night of the murders, because the parole board was trying to understand why Eric made some of the choices that he did. And I think something that's come up many times, that they've been asked many times over the years, is if Jose Menendez was the one that was doing the abuse and perpetrating in that way, their mom was reportedly not abusing them like Jose. And so the question then became, why did you choose to kill her if he was the problem there? And so that is something that he is asked, and I want to play part of his response to that.
Step by step, my mother had shown that she was united with my dad, but I still didn't believe she knew. And when I found out that she knew, I no longer saw him and her as different. They were different. She was his victim. I should have known that. I should have separated it in my mind. But at that night, I saw them as one person. Had she not been in the room, maybe it would have been different. It would have been different.
But that's something that the parole board commissioner really wants to question Eric on, because part of what makes these murders as heinous as they are is the fact that these brothers went in there, they fired off these rounds, and then they stopped and they reloaded the guns and kept firing. And it's that specific action and decision that the parole board commissioner then presses Eric on, and it's a pretty interesting answer he gives. Take a listen.
Step by step, my mother had shown that she was united with my dad, but I still didn't believe she knew. And when I found out that she knew, I no longer saw him and her as different. They were different. She was his victim. I should have known that. I should have separated it in my mind. But at that night, I saw them as one person. Had she not been in the room, maybe it would have been different. It would have been different.
But wait a minute. I'm going to ask you about that, because when you shot him the first time, she was still alive. You had to go out and reload to kill her.
Yes. All I heard was a no, and I ran out. That's the part of this that is the hardest. And you're right. I wish to God I did not do that.
Honestly, it was hard to listen to some of that audio just because it was like you could hear the emotion. And honestly, listening to more of the audio, we didn't play it all, but I went through and listened to quite a bit of it. There is definitely some respect, some sensitivity on both ends of this. Clearly, Eric was affected by the questions that were being asked, but rightfully so. I mean, these are what need to be asked. But the parole board commissioner seemed to have some kind of tact and maybe even some understanding for what Eric was going through. There were parts of this where he was like, do you need a break? Like, we don't want you to be upset or to stop breathing. Like, there was just definitely some very tense times. And a reminder too, that these were not in person. Eric and Lyle were virtually tapping into these parole board hearings from their prison, the R.J. Donovan Correctional Center in South San Diego. So they were there, and the parole board, I believe, was in Sacramento. So it was just kind of interesting how this is going on, these extremely emotional parole hearings, but not in person, and spanning the state and then spanning the entire day too. And so a lot of Eric and Lyle's family members said that these were just long, draining days. Lyle's audio has not been released yet because the family was upset about this. Now they're kind of going through the court system to decide when Lyle's audio would be released and the transcripts from these entire hearings. But something that I thought was interesting that I want to share is when I was listening to more of this, the parole board commissioner basically gave the reason why he denied them both. They both had multiple cell phone violations. They had some issues in prison. Not a lot, though, and Lyle had never had any sort of violence issues. But it seemed the parole board commissioners had kind of zeroed in on the fact that they were willing to do these cell phone violations, and that meant that they believed that they were above the rules, and that if they believed they're above the rules in prison after what they've already done, then they could, be a risk to society in terms of being above the rules outside of the prison walls. But the parole board commissioner noted with Eric that he's not ready for parole right now, but that they believe he could be ready for parole in the future. And by the parole board giving them the 3-year denial, that was one of the lowest that they could give them. They could have gone up to 15 years. And it's so much so that the brothers can ask for an administrative review within a year, and they could possibly have another parole hearing in a year and a half. So somewhere between a year and a half and 3 years, both of them are going to be back up for possible parole. And just based on the questions and the conversation that seemed to come from the parole board commissioner himself, it would not surprise me if they are granted parole at that time. Now, I know we've talked about it with you guys. California Governor Gavin Newsom could choose to grant them clemency at any time. He could also overrule the parole board and reverse their decision. But that's not typical. He's also made decisions where the parole board has recommended parole, and Gavin Newsom has actually denied that. So do I think Gavin Newsom's probably going to do something here and let the brothers go free before the parole board recommends they be granted parole? Probably not. Do I think in the near future here in the next few years that they will possibly be recommended for parole and that the governor would then grant that? Yeah, I think that's highly likely and definitely possible. So for all of the people who believe they should remain behind bars, and there are plenty of people who believe they should never get out because of what they did, they're still there, and this isn't going to change right now. For everybody who believes they should get out because they do believe they were abused, I would not be surprised if that happens in a few years. I think this was kind of a no right now, but not a no forever. So we'll stay on top of this. There is still a possibility they could be granted a new trial through a habeas corpus petition due to new evidence with a letter from Eric that detailed abuse from his father that was not found at the time in the 90s when they went to trial. There was also another boy band member of the band Menudo who came forward saying that Jose Menendez raped him. That evidence, that kind of information was not available at the time in the 90s either. So there's a possibility that they could be granted another trial. Not super likely, but there is still another path to freedom. Another question here, did the California DOC give any indication of how the audio was leaked? So basically, the DOC there, the Department of Corrections, said that it was released legally because these stations put in a public records request, just like any of us would for any case. But what we don't know is why they at first said this was released legally through, normal means, but then later on said, well, that was erroneously done. My belief is that if there was some sort of conversation, I want to say agreement, but maybe a conversation between the family of the Menendez brothers and the Department of Corrections that these things would be either hammered out in court as to when things would be released and why. That might be the case. It might also have been that the Department of Corrections wanted to talk to the family before this was released or was going to talk to the family about that and then didn't do that. I think there's several possibilities here as to why that happened. But at the time, ABC News legally obtained that audio. And it does make clear just in looking at some of the verbiage when it came to like, here's how you can prepare as a media member to learn about what happens at the parole hearings. It was pretty clear that they were going to release transcripts and be pretty open and transparent, at least within 30 days, as to what happened in these parole hearings. So I'm not surprised that the audio was released in that way, but what were those inside baseball conversations that were happening after it was released? Something clearly happened, and it wasn't something that the Department of Corrections wanted to elaborate on. So I thought that was interesting. I do hope at some point, depending on how this unfolds in court, that we may get to also listen to audio from Lyle. We were able to at least get some quotes from Lyle, who basically took on the full responsibility for the murders and said that he wants to protect his, quote, baby brother, and that the murders were his idea and that Eric should be released. So he was really taking on kind of that older brother mentality. But I do believe that Eric has actually had a couple more violence violations in prison than Lyle. Lyle has not had any violence in prison, but has had more cell phone violations. So we'll definitely be staying on top of it. Obviously, it's something that everybody has been talking about. But is anything going to happen right this second? No. Could it happen in the near future? Do I think we're done talking about the Menendez brothers and their potential path to freedom? Absolutely not. I think this is going to continue. So I appreciate everybody who tuned in live tonight. Again, sorry for those of you guys who were watching us yesterday. I promise next Thursday we will be on here ready to go at 7 p.m. It was my microphone, and good news tonight, that is working. So appreciate you all for staying on here with us. We're going to have more cases next week, and thanks to Steve Fischer as well for joining us live. You can follow True Crime AZ Live on Instagram and TikTok. We'll be posting some clips from this show, just kind of those memorable moments of these cases as they unravel, and we'll be following all these as well. Thanks again to everybody, and I'll see you on True Crime AZ Live next week. Good night.